We've announced the non-domestic support package, which means that the wholesale price for electricity will be £211 per megawatt, and for gas will be £75 per megawatt. And from that, customers will then get their prices. So it is providing for the non-domestic market, which includes schools and hospitals, charities and businesses, something that is equivalent to the support for the domestic sector. It's more complicated because there isn't a price cap for the non-domestic sector, but it will have an equivalent effect. And it's a huge support for business to ensure that they can cope with the rise in the price of energy that's come essentially from Putin's war.
Cost, any information on cost?
Well, the difficulty with giving you a cost figure is that this will depend on where the price of energy goes over the winter, and that's very difficult to forecast. So I can't give you an absolute cost, but we are talking about many billions of pounds.
Tens of billions.
Well, it will be into tens of billions, unquestionably.
One of the questions that business has asked today is why the business support package, non-consumer package, lasts for 6 months, whereas the consumer package lasts for 2 years. Can you just give us a bit of indication on your thinking? Is that because you expect gas prices to go down after 6 months, or is that a question of cost, or why is that?
It's because it's a much more complicated market with a whole variety of contractual arrangements. What we needed now, immediately, quickly, was something simple that would give people confidence through the winter. What we will have is a review in 3 months' time, which will allow us to see that we are giving support in the right places and that we can ensure that continued support, if that's necessary, is directed at where it needs to go. So it's essentially recognising that there is an urgent problem now that needs a big package, a broad scheme, but because people have hedges and long-term contracts, it will be possible to fuller analysis of the market to understand where support is most needed during the 6-month period.
Because companies need a bit of stability in order to plan, in order to invest, which is what you want them to do, they are wondering what's going to happen after 6 months. Can you give any indication of how you will determine who should get help after that 6 months? For example, take this one example, if gas prices are as high as they are today, could a school expect support in a year's time?
Well, most schools are funded via the taxpayer anyway, so they receive money from central government, the state system. But we are obviously going to have to support.
They still pay their own bills, which is what
they
you're
do,
helping today.
but we are going to have to support, and that's what we're announcing today, the state sector as well as the private sector. This is a fundamental increase in costs across the economy. And schools and hospitals and care homes are obviously going to be able to need to afford their energy in a year's time as well as today. I can't announce future schemes. It would be wrong to do so, and we need to make sure that we use this time to find out where the support is needed. But can businesses and public sector bodies afford the level of increase that there has been? Well, by and large, no, and that's why this scheme is being announced now.
All of this paid for by borrowing at a point where the cost of borrowing is the highest since the early 1980s, and today is an fairly open-ended sound of commitment going on, at a cost of tens of billions going on indefinitely.
No, interest rates aren't as high as they were in the early 1980s.
The amount that we are spending on our borrowing is the highest since the early 80s.
But the issue with that is a lot of that is in relation to index-linked gilts. And actually the cost of index-linked gilts will be lowered because this intervention will lower the rate of inflation. So there is a benefit in terms of the gilt market through this intervention. But this is a burden that would fall on the economy one way or another. And the question is, should it fall on individuals and on businesses who simply cannot afford it? Or is it something that has to be borne collectively on a balance sheet that can bear it? And it seems to me it's obvious that it has to fall on the balance sheet that can bear it. But you're quite right to point out that this has a cost.
Northern Ireland, when the original announcement was made, because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, you were unable to say what exactly was going to happen there. What can you say today?
I can say that Northern Ireland will have an equivalent scheme for gas and electricity, and there is a scheme also for heating oil, because 2/3 of households in Northern Ireland are dependent upon heating oil. Northern Ireland also requires legislation which will be introduced along with the legislation to cover the non-domestic side and some additions to the domestic side. The domestic side didn't of itself need legislation, but as we are legislating, there will be an element of that, because Northern Ireland didn't have a price cap and has a different regulator. So it's therefore been an equivalent solution rather than the same solution as GB is having.
Nobody in Northern Ireland will pay more than anybody on the GB mainland.
The scheme will be equivalent, and we're very conscious that there's more use, not just actually of heating oil, but also of coal and of bottled gas.